Hey everyone, we will continue on in our beginning of our qualitative research unit. We're going to be talking about interviews and semi-structured interviews today during class, but I want to first start with our field observation assignment as well, because that's coming up due this Sunday. If you need an extension, of course, please let me know. We can absolutely work something out there. I want to now go to the assignment, the field observation assignment description in Moodle. Same description you have in the syllabus. It's worth 20 points. And what you're going to do, you're going to conduct a field observation during our asynchronous class day, next class period. So you have that class period, not going to formally meet. We will have discussed, like we did, field observations and qualitative research in the weeks prior for you for this assignment. You're going to choose a desired subject and a desired setting, and you're going to write a 1 to 2 page summary of your findings. So we'll go over this in further detail in class. And what I mean by this is that there's this link here of how do you actually write a field observation, right? And we're going to discuss these observations as a class. So there's also these other links, field report structure and tips. As an example, field report template. There's also field observation example here that I've given you for Moodle in the Moodle page. So you can actually write up this field observation in a similar way, similar to this. Now, I'm only looking for 1 to 2 pages, but what I want is a detailed observation. So here's the assignment breakdown. So the objective is to help you develop skills in a qualitative field observation, which involves observing and describing social phenomena, social interactions and environments in a natural setting. So you're going to go to some natural setting, and you're going to observe and record notes and interpret your observations. You'll gain insights into different social behaviors, patterns, and different contexts here. So assignment instructions. Number 1, preparation before your actual observation. You need to choose a subject and a setting. So select a specific social setting for your observation. This could be a public space, like a coffee shop or a park or a library or a church or a mosque, whatever it might be. Could even be a virtual space, like an online community or forum. Or any other location where people are interacting naturally. So I want you to also determine a focus of your observation. Think about a social process, behavior, or interaction you're interested in studying. So maybe it's like communications patterns in a specific cafe, or group dynamics in a gym, or social interactions in an online forum. Plan for ethical consideration. So if your observation involves people in private settings, remember to either seek permission if you are observing in a private setting, or observing in public spaces. Make sure that you're de-identifying, that you're not stating names, or you're not taking, you're specifically identifying specific individuals. 2, I want you to conduct the social observation. Again, you're observing, you're taking in this social world with your sociological perspectives now. So the time frame, spend at least 45 minutes to an hour observing your chosen setting on the designated asynchronous class day. That date might not be perfectly correct there. Field notes. So as you observe, take detailed field notes. So write down specific behaviors, interactions, and details about the environment. These sorts of things can include the physical description. So describe the setting in detail, what the layout, the atmosphere, and the noise levels are like, those sorts of things. Describe people's actions and interactions. So focus on those interactions, on body language, on behaviors, and then contextual factors as well. So note any contextual details that could impact behaviors, things like time of day or any events that are happening nearby or any extraneous factors. And then a personal reflection. I want you to note your own reactions or thoughts during the observations. Consider how your perspective might shape what you're noticing. Write up of findings. Now, this is also key to your assignment. So I want you to write up your findings. So 1, I want a summary of the setting and observation. So 2 to 3 paragraphs here. So summarize the setting and provide an overview of the key observations. So this can include descriptions that paint a picture of the environment and the people that you have observed. The second, I want a description of observed interactions. So just detail specific interactions or behaviors that you have observed that were meaningful or interesting, and include direct quotes where possible, where you hear, or descriptive phrases from your notes to illustrate what's actually going on. Also, an analysis and interpretation. So, analyze the social interactions or behaviors you observed. Discuss any patterns, social norms, or behaviors that stood out. What do these observations suggest about the social dynamics in this setting? And then finally, just a reflection paragraph to conclude the assignment. Reflect on the observation process. Describe how it felt to observe and record social interactions. Did you notice any biases in your own observations? How did your perspective change your understanding or shape your understanding of the setting? What kind of biases or perspectives did you bring in to the research? So I just want you to do a formal observation, a social observation. So 2 to 3 page report, double spaced. If you go a little over, that's totally fine. Use section headings. So use like introduction to the setting, observation summary, analysis, and reflection. Use headings to detail that out, and then submit your report via Word or PDF document. Again, use it to submit on the Moodle page, but if that doesn't work, you can email me as well. And you have similar examples of how to write up a field report, a field observation example. This is one that's actually linked. You have templates here. So what is the purpose of field reports? So you can reference all of these things as well, and then tips for writing a field report. But this example is a really good one, this Betsy Price field observation report. Just an example of what a type of report can look like. If you want to include images, include images. So that's the field observation assignment. That will be, if you need an extension again, please let me know because it's a little bit of a quick turnaround. Please let me know of any questions you have on this, and then we can continue with discussing it and figuring out what did you learn from it. That's what I'm really curious to find out. Not just that you're doing it perfectly because it's the first time you're probably doing this, but what have you learned about this process? That's going to be really interesting. All right, quick pause. I did just correct this that in the field observation assignment, one place it said 1 to 2 pages, one place it said 2 to 3. I just corrected it. It is 2 to 3. Again, if you go a little over, that's totally fine. If you need that extension, let me know. So that is that assignment due on Sunday, the 16th. And again, so you can choose different subject areas you aren't maybe perfectly 100% comfortable or knowledgeable in, like churches or mosques or whatever it might be, a different field of study, a different class, go sit in on a different class, get permission from the professor first. Grocery store, student government meetings, community organization meetings, student organizations. I really want you to take in a setting maybe you're not super familiar with. So gain insight in that community and talk to people, watch how people interact and think about how you can analyze that social situation a little bit different. Now, today, like I mentioned, we're going to dive into interviews. Interviews are foundational in social science research. Let's just talk about what they are. What do we mean by an interview? How do we go about conducting them? So what are in-depth interviews? So in-depth interviews are, again, like I mentioned, a qualitative research method where the researcher conducts one-on-one conversations with participants, asking open-ended questions to explore their values, perspectives, experiences, and worldviews in detail. Remember we talked about open-ended and closed-ended questions in the survey section of our quantitative research unit? Open-ended. So a closed-ended would be, do you like this book? Yes or no? That's a closed-ended question. An open-ended would be, why or why not do you like this book? Or tell me more about your experience with this. Or what are your viewpoints on this? Those are examples of open-ended question. It gets people to elaborate. It's not a quick yes or no or multiple choice option question. So this method of in-depth interviews goes beyond surface level responses and aims to uncover the rich, more detailed narratives of participants. In-depth interviews are commonly used in sociology, for example, to understand how individuals make sense of their social world and their social experience. In-depth interviews are often paired with other qualitative methods like survey research, like focus groups or ethnographic observations that are used to triangulate findings and provide a fuller picture of the research topic. And some advantages of in-depth interviews. So they allow for some greater flexibility. Researchers can adapt the interview by asking follow-up questions to probe deeper into responses. This enables exploration of unexpected themes that emerge during the interview, right? In a survey, you can't do that. You have your set of questions. In an interview, you can go down different components that do come up. And then that allows for, again, another advantage, a lot of rich data. So interviews provide a wealth of qualitative data that reveals a lot more nuances of human experience and social context through those in-depth conversations. And then depth over breadth. So unlike surveys, which prioritize breadth, meaning surveys prioritize getting a large number of respondents, right? We talked about the advantage there. In-depth interviews focus on the depth of understanding. So diving really in depth to the data, more rich data, maybe less surface level data, less people, but more depth, less respondents, but more depth. It's also, interviews are participant centered. So they allow for participants to share their narratives in their own words, giving them agency in the research process. And it also gives insight into greater context. So researchers can gain insights into the social, cultural, and personal factors that shape the participants' respondents. So those are some great advantages of in-depth interviews, something that's really great about them. And some examples of applications of in-depth interviews in sociology, we use them to explore the lived experience of specific marginalized groups. That can be really important. Or investigate the impact of policy changes on individuals' lives and understanding cultural practices and beliefs within a specific community. Those are things that interviews can do a really great job of helping us understand better. And it's important to have a couple of key considerations as well. That interviews can be more time-consuming and resource-intensive as they require careful planning and execution of analysis, which you will actually do. You will do each of those. But there are also subjective interpretations during analysis that require and necessitate more transparency and reflexity and having us to be able to be more transparent and describe our process as researchers. So a little bit more subjectivity involved from the researcher's standpoint here. But they're really important tools in the social science researcher's toolbox. All right, in-depth interviews, open-ended question. Remember, prioritizing in-depth, open-ended question, asking the how and the why, not just the yes or no types of questions. So defining in-depth interviews. We already talked about that, right? That they're a qualitative method designed to explore those complex ideas and experiences and perspectives, and they include open-ended questions. Open-ended questions encourage respondents to provide detailed and elaborate answers. So instead of a simple yes or no response, what open-ended questions do, they allow for deeper insight into participants' thoughts and feelings. So for example, a closed-ended question would be, did you enjoy that event? You can answer that in a yes, no way. An open-ended would be, what was your experience like at that event? And you're going to get a much more in-depth and rich data from that, rich description. Semi-structured interviews. So semi-structured interviews, we'll get into that actually on the next slide a bit further, but semi-structured interviews blend structure and flexibility. So while there is a guide or a framework of key topics and questions to cover, the interview can adapt and to the flow of conversation. You're not just going down a predetermined list of questions. You are going to have some written questions, but you can go in the directions that you choose to go in based upon the interview. And this adaptability makes interviews, and specifically semi-structured interviews, particularly useful in exploring unexpected and relevant topics that arise during the interview. So the differences from survey interviews. So in survey interviews, the goal is often to quantify responses for statistical analysis. Then that requires more standardized questions and answer formats. Field interviews are an example. Now, in-depth interviews prioritize understanding over standardization. So valuing more rich, nuanced, qualitative data over numerical consistency. So rather than having a survey interview, we have a predetermined list, just like a survey, but you're conducting the survey yourself. A semi-structured interview allows us to go in a lot of different directions. And just some tips for constructing in-depth interviews, which we'll get into as well. So we'll talk about how we actually construct interview guides and that sort of thing. Semi-structured interviews. So we already kind of talked about here, right? So flexible format and balances structure and open exploration, combines a planned framework with room for organic discussion, and then useful for exploring complex, nuanced, or personal topics. So semi-structured interviews are really what we're focusing on here. This is the bread and butter. And semi-structured interviews are a hybrid between your purely structured interviews and unstructured interviews. So a purely structured interview would be like a survey. An unstructured interview would be there's no questions at all. You're just going into the conversation. So these semi-structured interviews follow a general plan of inquiry, but do allow for that flexibility to probe deeper into specific topics based on the respondent's answers. So this is ideal for exploring topics where depth and context are really critical, and they're often used in qualitative research to uncover themes and attitudes and personal experience in more detail. So let's talk a little bit more about semi-structured interviews. So let's talk about the preparation, the conducting the interview, skills required, ethical considerations, and then strengths and limitations will actually be on the following slide. So preparation for a semi-structured interview, like you're going to be doing. So take this in because you're going to be doing all of this. Preparation. So the interviewer should create a semi-structured interview guide with key themes and topics and open-ended questions that you're going to cover. We're going to actually practice that in class together. You should have familiarity with the topic. That's really crucial to guide the conversation effectively. Know what your topic is about. And then other preparation to allow for a smooth transition and natural flow without feeling rigid. You should understand your interview guide, your research questions, the questions you're going to ask really, really well. That second, they're conducting the interview itself. So while there is a structure, questions don't have to follow a specific order in a semi-structured interview, and also can be adapted based on responses. So the goal of a semi-structured interview is to let respondents elaborate freely, with the interviewer actively listening and guiding as needed. And open-ended questions, like especially open-ended follow-up questions like, can you tell me more about that? Or, hey, please go into more detail there. Those things are really useful, and they encourage richer responses. So the interviewer may also use other prompts or probes to clarify or expand on key points. But I want you to practice those as well in your interview. Like someone gives an answer to a question, maybe use a little bit shorter answer, and you say, can you tell me more about that? Or, hey, that sounds really interesting. Let's go there. Can you give me more detail? Skills required. So a couple of key skills to consider as you practice conducting these is active listening is one. So maintain focus on what the respondent says while processing potential follow-ups. That's a really good skill. As you're taking notes, you still want to be very actively listening. You're not just listening to your questions and waiting for people to be done talking. I want you to be actively listening and engaging with your interview respondent. Adaptability is another here as well, another good skill. So be ready to explore unexpected topics or skip less relevant questions. As things come up, you're going to realize your interview is going to go certain ways that maybe you didn't expect. You need to adapt to that. And then communication is another. So encourage participation through nonverbal cues and an open demeanor. Make the person feel comfortable, right? And make sure they know that you're actively listening. Nod or some sorts of approval, like, yeah, that makes sense. Or yep, absolutely. Eye contact also can be really important. Also, ethical considerations to consider with semi-structured interviews. You want to build rapport and trust to make sure that respondents feel comfortable sharing. So you don't have to just dive right into, hey, what's your view on this specific issue? Start with some intro questions. Build that sort of rapport and connection with your respondent. And then as well here, ensure that informed consent is maintained and that you maintain confidentiality and anonymity, right? We'll talk more about that more and more, but we already have touched a bit, and we'll actually have how do you obtain confidentiality, right? And there are different ways to do that, or how do you obtain informed consent? So let's talk about those strengths and limitations. A couple key strengths and limitations of semi-structured interviews. Strengths, well, semi-structured interviews, they provide deeper understanding compared to more rigid survey methods. They also balance consistency across interviews with the flexibility to explore unique perspectives. So we get to go down all these different trains of thought. We can have multiple interviews. We get all this really rich data that we get a really good synthesis of. A couple limitations to semi-structured interviews, though, is that they are time intensive to conduct and analyze. And then they also require skilled interviews to ensure effectiveness. So you are entry-level interviewers here. You're going to get practice here. And maybe someday you'll have 1,000 interviews under your belt or 500, and you'll be at that point where you are really, really comfortable and love conducting interviews. Now, the interview process is really the last slide I have before just another assignment reminder. This is the last slide I have because this is going to be important, and we're going to go over in class too. We're actually going to practice these things, but I want you to understand what goes into the interview process. So number one, you have to determine the topic. So you expand on clarity of the research question. So A well-defined research question is really the backbone of effective interviews, right? So it really guides the development of our questions and ensures alignment with our study goals and some consistency. So you want to have a good, clear research question. So, for example, for a study on job satisfaction, you might explore workers' experiences and perceptions of workplace culture and interactions with management. So those are going to be, if that's your research question, your questions are going to revolve around that. And so maybe even pilot testing. You're not going to do this, but you should be aware that sometimes you might pilot test interview guides. So piloting interview questions with a small group can really help to refine them. Number two, planning interview logistics. So include ethical approval, right? So if you're conducting a formal research project through the college, you're going to go through an institutional review board or equivalent ethics committee, or research involving human rights. So you want to go over all those things like you would any other research project. Recruitment. So you want to also recruit the interview participants. So examples of recruitment strategies could be if you're doing a big project like social media ads or community outreach or snowball sampling. So what you're going to do probably is maybe find a friend or a friend of a friend or someone you know to conduct your interview. Let's say you wanted to conduct 10 of them though, and you wanted to, let's say you wanted to interview at least half of the Concordia College baseball team. Well, maybe you're going to start with one person you know on the team, and then as a snowball sample, they introduce you to another person. That person introduces you to another person, and you just keep going down the line interviewing. So that's examples of how you could recruit for interviews. And then just consider that accessibility right there, necessary accommodations and comfortability for participants. Three, actually conducting the interview. So that rapport building that I've already mentioned is really important. So I want you to make sure that you understand the importance of starting interviews with maybe more small talk, things like that, to build trust and that comfort there. Just make people feel at ease, that it doesn't have to feel so rigid and so structured. And that nonverbal communication is important here. So nonverbal cues like nodding or maintaining eye contact, those things encourage participation and respondents. You want to make sure that the respondent, the interviewer, the interviewee that you're interviewing is comfortable, right? Is wants to participate, that you make them feel as comfortable as possible. And examples of other probes as well. So providing examples or using examples of probing questions. So can you elaborate on that further? Or what led you to that experience? Or say more about this. Those things can encourage greater participation too. For transcribing interview data, we will also go over this further. But here, like qualitative software tools, like there are various examples that you can use, but analyzing transcriptions, because we need to make sure that, let's say you've recorded this interview now, what do you actually do with that? How do you analyze an audio recording where you need it transcribed? So we can now there's so many AI tools that can do this quite well. In the past, you'd have to do it yourself. So you'd have to listen to the recording, transcribe it, listen, transcribe, listen, transcribe, listen, transcribe. So word by word, you'd have to do it yourself. Now there are other tools, and we're going to use one of them that actually will get you a transcription. So first, got to transcribe it. So you get an actual transcript, a text transcript of what that interview was, how that interview went. And then you want to consider ethical considerations for the transcription too. So add a note of, we want to make sure that we ensure participants' confidentiality during that transcription process, and then anonymity as well. Number 5, data analysis. So data analysis is often an iterative process. So it requires multiple rounds of reading and coding for deeper insights. There are different software examples to mention, but we'll go over the transcription and data analysis and that sort of component in a following class session. We're going to get practice on actually, what does transcribed data actually look like? How do we code this? How do we code qualitative data? We'll get into that. Number 6, validating the data. So sometimes use triangulation. Remember we talked about triangulation? So again, as a reminder, triangulation is a method of enhancing that validity of your results by cross-verifying data with other sources. So maybe it's observational data, some background research, content analysis. Maybe you're pairing your interviews with focus groups. Maybe you're pairing your interviews with a survey. That's an example of triangulation. And then sharing your research results. So just making sure that as researchers, I want to highlight that we're a part of building this coalition, or building this understanding and working collaboratively. So make sure that However you're reporting your findings. So the components that we're really going to focus on, the steps are 1 through 5. Those are going to be the key steps that we focus on in this class, and we're going to practice them in class, and then you're going to do it with an actual interview practice and analysis assignment. You're going to do all of that on your own. So this is going to be a really great practice for you. We'll practice the exact steps that you're going to have to do in class, and then you're going to do it on your own for your assignment as well. And finally, just another assignment reminder of your field observation. So make sure that you're starting to think about how do you want to do the field observation? Use that class period on Friday to either conduct your field observation or work on this further, meet with me to talk about what do we actually need to do here, or what questions you have about the assignment. So be thinking about this now so you can do this over the weekend. And if you need an extension on your field observation, just let me know. There's no problem at all with that. All right, everybody. That's it for the day. I really, really appreciate you tuning in and think again about anything with your field observation assignment. If you have any questions at all, please let me know. Until next time, we'll see you.